It's around 12,000 BCE. You wake up and there is no address, no street, no building with a number on it. The place you slept last night is a skin stretched over bent branches, and you know, without thinking about it the way you'd think about a lease, that you will not sleep here again after the next moon or two, not because something went wrong, because this is the plan. This has always been the plan. You fold the skin, you pick up what you own, which fits in your arms, and you walk toward where the animals went. Nobody calls this survival. This is just Tuesday. We have a word for what those people were doing. We call them hunter-gatherers, and the word is accurate and almost completely useless because it tells you the mechanism and hides the life. It's like describing a city by saying, people who sit in chairs and stare at screens. Technically true, tells you nothing that matters. So, today, we're going back. Not to the pyramids, not to Rome, not to any civilization you've heard of. We're going further, to the 300,000 years before any of that existed, to the version of human life that is, by every measure of time, the default setting, the thing we were doing for 96% of our existence as a species. And what you'll find is not what you were taught to expect, the thing nobody tells you about before cities. Here is the assumption baked into almost every history class you've ever sat through. Before cities, life was hard, short, brutal, and empty. People were cold, people were hungry, people were one bad winter from extinction. They were waiting, essentially, for someone to invent agriculture and rescue them from the misery of being free. That picture is wrong. Not romantically wrong, not ideologically wrong, factually wrong. And we know it's wrong because the evidence has been piling up for decades and it keeps pointing the same direction. The anthropologist Marshall Salins looked hard at this in the 1960s and came back with something nobody wanted to hear. Hunter-gatherers, he argued, were the original affluent society. Not because they had a lot, because they needed very little. And the gap between what they needed and what was available to them was, in many environments, not very large at all. Studies of the Kungsan people of the Kalahari, one of the best documented foraging societies of the 20th century, found that adults spent somewhere between 12 and 19 hours a week on food acquisition. Per week. The rest was talking, sleeping, making things, visiting, and what an economist would reluctantly call leisure. The average medieval peasant worked twice that and ate worse. Now I want to be careful here, because this is where the argument gets flattened into something it shouldn't be. This is not a claim that pre-agricultural life was paradise. It wasn't. Infant mortality was genuinely brutal. A bad season in the wrong place could kill a band. Injuries that a hospital fixes in 40 minutes could kill you in a week. There was no buffer. When it went wrong, it went all the way wrong. But the point is that it went wrong sometimes. Not constantly. Not as the baseline. The baseline was a working system built by 300,000 years of iteration, and it worked well enough to produce every human being alive today. What the life actually looked like, the unit, was the band. Somewhere between 20 and 50 people, almost always, not random. That number is not a coincidence. It is the size at which a group can feed itself from a landscape without destroying it, make collective decisions without formal government, and maintain the web of personal relationships that holds a community together without anyone needing a title. Above 150, you need institutions. Below 15, you can't defend against anything or recover from a bad birth year. The band is the size human social cognition appears to be calibrated for. Robin Dunbar, the anthropologist behind what's now called Dunbar's number, has argued that the social brain hypothesis, the idea that primate intelligence evolved primarily to manage complex social relationships, maps almost perfectly onto these group sizes. We didn't get smart to make tools. We got smart to keep track of each other. You moved seasonally, not randomly. The routes were known, inherited, memorized with a precision that looks casual and isn't. Which valley held deer in autumn, where the tubers were fattest after rain? Which riverbank the fish ran along in spring? This was knowledge, accumulated over generations, embedded in story and song, and the repeated experience of walking the same ground your grandmother walked. The landscape was not wilderness. It was a managed estate. Fire was used systematically to encourage grassland, drive game, promote the growth of specific plants. The Australian Aboriginal practice of what's now called cultural burning, which land managers are actively studying and reintroducing today, because it turns out to work extremely well, is a technology tens of thousands of years old. The land that European colonizers described as wild and untouched was, in many places, a garden. They just couldn't see the gardeners, what they owned, and what they knew. Material possessions were constrained by one very practical fact. You carried everything you had, every tool, every skin, every piece of equipment had to justify its weight against the distance you were going to walk with it. What this produced was not poverty. It produced extraordinary craft applied to a small number of objects. Paleolithic tools, examined under microscope, show manufacturing sequences of startling complexity. A hand axe from 300,000 years ago required selecting the right stone, understanding its fracture patterns, and executing a precise series of strikes in a specific order. Doing it wrong at step 7 meant starting over. The margin for error was low, and the practitioners knew it. What didn't weigh anything was kept in abundance. Story, song, ritual. The cave paintings of Lascaux and Altamira, dated to between 17,000 and 36,000 years ago, are not doodles. The pigments were prepared. The sites were chosen deliberately, often deep in systems that required navigating by firelight to reach. Some of the images show composite creatures, part human, part animal, that require a concept of transformation, of one thing becoming another. That is not the output of a brain that hasn't woken up yet. That is a mind doing something with reality that goes well beyond recording what it sees. The turn. Here's the part that reframes the whole story. Agriculture did not rescue people from misery. The skeletal evidence is extremely clear on this. When populations shifted from foraging to farming, average height dropped, dental cavities increased sharply, nutritional deficiency diseases appear in the bones, the diet narrowed from dozens of species to a handful of cultivated crops. Working hours went up, personal autonomy went down. The first farmers were, by most measurable physical indicators, worse off than the people who came before them. So why did it spread? Because it produced more people. Not healthier people, not happier people. More people. A farming community of 200 outcompetes a foraging band of 40 in every conflict, regardless of who is individually stronger, better fed, or more knowledgeable about the land. Agriculture is not a story of improvement. It is a story of a particular strategy winning a numbers game, and the people caught on the losing side of that game mostly vanished from the record, which is part of why we tell the story the way we do. The step back. So what were we before all of this? Small, mobile, embedded in a specific piece of land in a way that no city dweller has been since, carrying everything that mattered, knowing everyone who mattered, spending, by some accounts, more hours in rest and conversation than the average person living today in a wealthy country with a 40-hour work week and 2 weeks of annual leave. Not better, not worse, different in ways that our bodies still remember, even when our lives have entirely forgotten. You have 2 to 4 million sweat glands calibrated for long-distance running in open heat. A social brain built for 50 people, now pointed at 500 million followers. A stress response designed for a predator encounter that lasts minutes, running continuously against a mortgage that lasts 30 years. The mismatch is not a personal failure. It is a 12,000-year-old experiment that is still in progress. Somewhere in the record, there is a hand pressed against a cave wall in ochre and blown pigment 30,000 years ago, in the dark, for reasons we will never fully recover. It's still there. You've probably seen a photograph of it. Whose hand was that? What were they thinking about when they pressed it flat and blew the color around it? Let me know in the comments. See you soon.